Our relationship with identity is the linchpin on which the possibilities and dangers of what we think of as our human intelligence rest and pivot. So what I'm speaking of is our experience of what things are, what things, beings, and relationships are, what they are, their identity, our own identities, and how we either become more intelligent over time with this possibility of our minds, or less intelligent and kind of trapped in habits. And these habits are dangerous, and most of them are crippling. They're unnecessary. We don't need to have them. And we can easily have other experiences of identity. But in order to do that, we need to see into the problem somehow together. How do we know what things are? Well, certainly starting out in life, we don't. And before we have language, in other words, before we undergo the cultural process of enlanguaging, of being imprinted with not just language, but with its frameworks, our relationship with identity is far less formal and vastly more alive and diverse. Everyone probably remembers being a child, and at least perhaps one time in their childhood, if not many times, hearing an adult proclaim about some fascinating object we acquired or wanted to play with, which meant to learn about. The adult would say, "That is not a toy." But to the child, to their experience of intelligence and identity, this proclamation can't be true. And the reason it can't be true is that the child doesn't have an explicit class of objects the way the adult does. For a child, to play with something is a method of learning and seeing directly. A deep engagement. And also a deep not knowing. Not knowing what it is. The child is more oriented toward how they might relate with it. What could it become in relation, in my mind, in imagination, in wonder, in awe, in reverence, in play. As we become enlanguaged, we understand the adult's admonition that some objects are designed to be played with and belong rationally to the class of toys. Others do not, and some perhaps are dangerous or even deadly when played with, just as some others are dangerous and deadly when taken seriously, like guns, for example. Our relationship with identity is fundamentally broken by language and our encounter with knowledge. And so I'd like to suggest that if we were to have an experience of the identity, something more like the true identity, of a gnat or a mouse or a seed, if we were to get, say, speaking to the rational mind, a 5% of the true nature and identity when we encounter something, a leaf, of anything, a stone. That experience would be so overwhelming that it would stand above all the rest of our human experience, shockingly above it. We don't know what things are, and there's a peculiar reason why. The way we know what things are in language is peculiarly flawed. We know what things are in language by comparison to other things we know from language. How then do we know new things, or things that do not fit, or things that perhaps might destroy, question, or re-engineer the entire structure of identity? And there are peculiar features to this relationship. There is a structured array of ideas that underlie our experience of identity. And we can learn to see into and intelligently relate with these potentials the same way we did with language as a second order of intelligence. But we don't, usually, or very few of us do. And those of us that do so informally, sort of by ourselves. So that we know what a tree is by comparison to classes. It is a plant, it is a vegetable, it is a living arrangement. And we think of it as fundamentally distinct when we call it a tree, yet it cannot be that way. Any tree is at least, half its relationships and environment. So when we say the tree, we exclude those, and we think of the tree as a distinct individual. Yet, if we harm the tree, all of its relationships die. Two, those things we didn't notice in the other half of reality, at least half. Maybe most of the tree is in relation, and not too much of it is in the thing we can name as distinct. Our language doesn't allow us to examine this very well, and yet it is the nature of our minds and our humanity. Our intelligence is mostly in relationships. It's not mostly in my head, as we might imagine, as language might suggest. But getting back to the structure, there's a peculiar feature of it we can take advantage of if we notice it, which is that in our relationship with identity, our experiences form a hierarchy, such that identity is inherited from upper positions, or it is instanced in products in a tree-like structure, so that whatever is at the top, the supercontainer, we might call it, the bag, the set, the big bubble that holds everything, identity descends from that toward the products of any way of seeing or dividing the supercontainer. In other words, what's the universe? What is the universe? Well, for most of us, it's a pretty diffuse target. It's a word with which we can indicate everything that possibly is, everything that is, and has been and may be, without saying anything specific about it other than that's what we're indicating. So it doesn't tell us anything about really what it's like, the big thing. And yet we have the world, which is our little version of it, and perhaps that should tell us something about what it's like. Language gets in the way of that. If we don't have a reasonably intelligent supercontainer, we just don't know what everything is. It could be anything. Then all of the identities below that, what the sun is, what the world is, what an animal is, what a seed or a mouse or an gnat is, what a word is, what intelligence is, all these things no longer inherit anything from the supercontainer. The supercontainer is blank. Now, God was the original kind of supercontainer, right? If we knew sort of what God was, which is a strange idea, by the way, to think that we could know what it is, then we could know what everything in the universe was and was for. See how identity descends, right, from whatever we think everything is about. But even if we just take the supercontainer down to the world, right, because a lot of people would just say, well, I don't know what the universe is, but here's the world, here's this, let's work with what we have here. Our model of what the world is tells us who to become, how to think, what kind of mind to form. And where that model is fictional, or poorly crafted at best, or not, it doesn't correct itself toward verity or truth, then we're in a deadly trap, right? Because all of identity will inherit those fictions, and our relationship with identity will lack its authentic roots and true potentials. We will dwell in a world of language and knowledge. And we will ask very strange questions, as if some things are good and some things are bad, explicitly, intrinsically. And as if some things are normal and some things are not, explicitly, as if normal were a real idea. Language is very deceptive. But what I really want to point at is, by changing the nature of our relationship with identity, we can at once remove some of the layers of kind of blind denotation, of thinking that because I can say that's a tree, I know what it is. And we can also have a direct experience, a true experience, of the nature of identity and intelligence together in ways that are very rare for those who have not stepped beyond the common traps comprised by our habits, what we think a human is supposed to be, what we think a tree does. And the real promise here, of course, is the promise of more intelligence, but there's the promise of an experience, and that's what I'm hoping to point at. And that experience is to encounter anything at all, but especially any living thing, in such a way as to have a true experience and relationship with identity. Now, that doesn't mean perfect. It doesn't mean you would, for example, see a mouse and have an experience of 100% of what the truth of a mouse actually is. What's really shocking is, if any of us could have even a small experience of this, of 2% of what a mouse truly is, as opposed to what we think about it, and our models and ideas, and where it fits in our categories, that experience would overwhelm our entire history of thought, shockingly like lightning, with an ecstatic, awe-filled wonder of intelligent seeing as learning. And this is the nature of our minds. And it is the promise of language and knowledge. And yet, because of our peculiar habits with them, because we are too easily beguiled by their very superficial, shall we say, efficiency, we forget what lies underneath them. And vastly more of our intelligence than that which we can experience in thinking and language is alive as our minds are ache toward growth and learning. And yet, trapped in this world of language, we don't even have we don't know what we're missing. We don't even have the excitement, and we can't tell what went away. How will we discover something more like what the supercontainer really is? Well, we can forget about all of the projections of culture to begin with, all of the ideas of religion and science. We can leave them at the door. We don't have to get rid of them, but we're not going to see them as authoritative. And like children, having experienced all those things, we will try to understand what it means to be alive, what it means to relate directly with other living beings as a living being, in a living environment on a living planet in space. The actual experience of identity is not like language. It's not like anything we can say, but it is somewhat like dreaming in that it is redolent of a profound dimension of meaningful intelligence that language is somehow the exhaust product of. The leftover remains, the skeletal trace of. But we must have the living experience. And this is where our minds were born, and the true purpose for which they arise. How ironic that together we practice something that explicitly inhibits and denies that, and even raise up gods of science and religion instead of true relation and discovery. Something's wrong, and it's been wrong for thousands of years. But it hasn't been wrong in the same way the whole time. It's been a progressive problem, where the possibility of knowledge, saying I know what that is, and feeling good about it, I don't have to be terrified, it's a tree. Just like all the other trees. Yes, it's just like the word tree, and all the other words like that, but that tree, its identity, is nothing like that. And the identity of the sun, the identity of a worm. The shocking thing about this is, whatever we think things are, we become that kind of thing. So if we think things are easily denotable in categorical frameworks, then we become that kind of thing. We think, well, I am that kind of thing too. I am a human. I know what that is. No one knows what that is. No one has ever known what that is. And those who know, when they speak of it, those who know something interesting about what that might be, when they speak of it, you will notice a reverence and intelligence, a depth and sensitivity unlike common language. They may have to speak in song. They may have to speak in broken language that makes no ordinary sense, because their experience of identity overwhelms categories and overwhelms all of the projections of the thinking mind on reality. Completely overwhelms them. To have the slightest experience of the identity of a living thing in relation with it, in true relation, is an experience beyond anything promised by religion. And it cannot be hinted at in science. These ways of knowing have a different purpose. Their purpose is to tell us what things are or do, in very limited frameworks from very limited perspectives. From perspectives that have agendas, that desire to tell us what things are and do for a reason. It's not that these frameworks don't have use. All of them can be useful when they're intelligently understood and their dangers can be seen. So too their opportunities. Always these are the polarity, right? The dangers always imply the opportunities, and it's the same with our relationship with identity and language. But what I really want and hope for here is that you'll begin to be very skeptical about what you think things are, and how you know what they are, and how you came to think you know what they are. And I promise you that whatever things in relationships, beings, and the world, and the sun, and the sky might be, whatever they may be, they're nothing like what we think they are. And to encounter any of these things directly would completely overwhelm your entire history of relationship with language and identity. And this is one of the reasons why common people avoid this experience. Or they may if rather adventurous, seek some kind of other way out, right? Some practice or perhaps a psychedelic intoxicant that would take them outside for a moment, outside the normal experience of identity, into at least some other experience. And notice that language and science and religion are precisely these kinds of things. Science changes our relationship with identity, whether we practice it or are exposed to it. Religion, whether we practice or are exposed, changes our relationship with identity and dominates it in various ways and delimits it in many, many shocking ways, especially for a way of knowing that claims such profound authenticity, such incredible, unquestionable authority. The proclamations that emerge from this authority are extremely bizarre, given those projections of its supposed character. There's a terrible conflict there that's been obvious to everyone, even the religious, throughout the entire history of the problem. So I hope that you'll begin to question what your relationship with identity is, and to take the locks off the idea that you know what anything is, especially you, especially your mind. You and your mind are not like anything that you can compare them to. To know what they are like, you would have to go beyond culture and perhaps see what are they instances of. What is above them that generates these as organs of itself? Huh? And what is above them is, of course, the universe, the sun. And what is all around them is a living world floating in time-space. It's nothing like the things we've been told about it. It's beyond the wildest dreams we've ever made. The fantasies, the science fiction, the religions. Any living thing is so shockingly beyond them all that were you to get a taste of it, you wouldn't be much interested in all the other things, because that taste would be like a drop of the nectar from the living fountain, whence from our minds and souls came forth. A taste of a home, alive and true and present. And a taste of intelligence so shocking that nothing in human culture compares to it. There's nothing like the source from which our strange and often disembodied functional representations arise. That source is true and pure beyond all words. And like our own minds, most of which is hidden from our consciousness and thought, most of which is not like language, most of which is like our hearts. But even these lie undiscovered and too quickly spoken of. The question that comes to life in relation to identity is a living star of intelligence. And so I encourage you to doubt that you know what things are, and to question the strange projections of language, and to look into this structure where a supercontainer, whatever you think the big thing is, tells all the little things inside it what to be. Change the supercontainer, you've got a different world in your mind. Any slight correction to the idea of what the world is will radically transform your intelligence. Anything that gets you closer to what it really is, different from what we think it is. So too, an organism, the sun, human culture, language itself, look very deeply into these matters. And I promise you'll discover something very shocking. The true relationship with identity is much more like dreaming than it is like thinking. And it has many dimensions of incredible vitality and diverse, intelligent beauty that are absolutely unavailable in our ordinary relationship with language, what things are, how we know what things are, and memory. Good luck. I hope you'll have something new to see, and perhaps even a new way of looking.